Okay. Hi, my name is Scott, and I'm a pastoral intern here in. I live in Western North Carolina right now. That's where I'm currently serving, and I'm not a scholar or act or of either religion or fact studies or food studies or environmental justice. But I just wanted to see if I could contribute something to the conversation. Thank you very much for having me. So I am interested in this is and this is a presentation about the this is about food justice, food, faith, and food justice, fat justice, and faith. So I'm coming from a Christian point of view. Uh, what is this out? So yeah, I'm coming from a Christian point of view. Um, and Christianity is big and broad. Um, and, and there are lots of different ways to do it. So you might not be coming from this frame of reference, or you might be and still disagree with me because of factual or opinion-based disagreements, which is totally fine. But I'm going to speak in from this context, just because there's been a lot of unnecessary universalizing coming from my co-religionists, and we should be, honest about where we're at with that. So the food justice and food studies are movements that are right to critique many aspects of the food system um, that exist, for example, in the United States, a truly global system. There are issues of environmental degradation, worker exploitation, soil depletion, economics, and just a lack of ability to have access to nutritious, healthy food. Um, but there are issues within this movement. In fact, just fact studies folks have been right to, as Becca Hernandez says, call out that hatred that exists within these movements, um, whether it's overt hatred or just a lack of awareness or care for the way that these things are. That, that there are fat people who have bodies and their voices can become a part of the situation and the movement. Um, food and environmental justice movement. Um, so from a Christian perspective, you know, um, these sorts of movements have also been going along for a very long time and have sort of dovetailed with the work of food justice work like Michael Pollan and even Wendell Berry. Uh, but there can also be issues here where we're looking at um, obesity as if though there's this thing that's wrong. Obesity that's causing people to get hurt from being. What's happening is that obesity it's looking at fat people and fat bodies as they're wrong, disease, or shameful. And while not always food justice and Christian food justice is not always putting it on the person or asking for an individual change, but looking at systems, it still is saying that the fat body is wrong, or that when we look at the Anthropocene and we look at this time where there's been so much environmental degradation, in part coming from ways of people looking at Genesis 1:28 of dominion over the earth, that the world has been changed and bodies have been changed for all sorts of reasons. We have these compounds, these new man-made compounds and women-made compounds that are in our bodies. We are in an Anthropocene time. Uh, we all have radiation in our bones from nuclear bombs and all these things. And the surface of the world has been changed irreparably. So to extend that and say bodies, fat, big bodies, are part of this problem, are a symptom of what is wrong here. That we can try to ask. and demand that the food systems and food corporations take accountability for making obese bodies, which are wrong, and their role in the obesity epidemic. Now, I'm sure that this being a Fat Studies conference, that you are well aware of the ways that that framing is wrong. It's based on concepts of health, which are not universal, and that also falsely equivocate, it falsely puts as if though fat is unhealthy when there's so much more going on. I think we're, this Fat Studies conference, so we're all on the same page there. So, what we need to do here is to look in deeper and use the resources that already exist within Christian theology that cares about the environment to make sure that we are embracing all bodies and celebrating it. Because food justice, it doesn't really matter if we're not bringing everyone to the table. And to be really sincere about the ways that obese people and non-obese people, this is a crazy word, obese, right? So, and that's a crazy word, crazy, right? So fat people, larger people, um, can have a seat at the table, a bigger seat if they need to, and that's not shameful. Oh fuck! Am I plugged in? Okay, what's up? So yeah, it's not shameful or anything that if that's who we are, and so returning to land, to the natural, to the agrarian ways of life, can be very much romanticized uh, as some sort of former tradition. So, how do we care deeply about food and fat people? I think one really important place to start would be to note that there's not necessarily an implicit connection between food and fat. Like Lindo Bacon and others have pointed out, we're assuming that fat people are fat because they eat a lot. And that's not necessarily the case. People can have all sorts of amounts of eating that they do regardless of their body size. So, already by necessarily assuming that food justice and fat justice should be related is connected to diet culture and sort of these, unfortunately unnuanced ideas like calories in, calories out. Like, but right? So I want to be clear about that. There's nothing, it's not we all eat food, and this is part of the issue is the idea that fat people are eating too much food or are, you know, doing something wrong there. And that's just not really the case. I mean, it certainly can be. There's a lot of different types of people out there. Um, but our generalizations are wrong. When we look at people and assume that gluttony is why they're fat, it's a huge mistake. We also need to deconstruct the whole concept of gluttony because it's not just in being somebody who eats too much or takes pleasure in food, but it is the way that food and lack of that you would be depriving others of food by what you choose to do. So, therefore, I will tell you that food justice, but food justice does matter because eating is an agricultural act and our bodies are part of the earth. Our bodies are natural. Now, the concept of the natural can get weird whether you're in sciences or theology or theological sciences because following Sabrina String's work again,
We could trace the way that people look at what's around them and assume their desires for bodies are natural. But that's not, we're always getting into rough situations when we want to call things natural. The division between nature and non nature is also an interesting binary, too. But bodies are a part of the earth. Bodies are a part of the earth. We come from the earth and we return to the earth. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust. That's what we're made out of in the Christian understanding of things. And so it's hard to be a body. Now, what I want to talk about, this is the actual part where the lecture starts, is that learning, serving, community. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So this is what I want to say. God is good. No, this is what I want to say. Genesis 1:28. And God blessed them right, it says God bless them and rule over the sea. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Do it. Dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And I'm purposely doing the King James version, not the Hebrew or a version that I'm more comfortable with. But shit, it says what is important. What's important is that a rendering of the word dominion can be taken to mean domination, but this is not necessarily the frame that would have been useful or is the most useful to us for understanding this. Because if we are created in the image of God, therefore that means that our domination and our dominion has to be done in a godly way, not in a way of disposability, not in a way of trashing and despair. Now, Richard Bauckham does a very good job in two books, the Bible and Ecology and Living with Other Creatures, about looking at the history of dominion and how this works, and sort of going against what Lynn something something Lynn White Jr. uh sort of saying that the historical roots of ecological crisis are in Christianity and in that interpretation of that verse. That might be the case. There's long different histories there, especially as Bauckham traces like the way that Francis Bacon looked at it, to really be about domination and dominion. But there's different ways to look at this term. It's about having power and mastery working. And the word for man is Adamah, which means to become constituted out of the soil, to be a soil person, an earthling who is shaped in the image of God, to have dominion over the world, but to be, you know, not anthropocentric, but rather theocentric, right? And so this is useful for looking at the ways that um, we can move against diet culture because diets don't really work, and weight loss, eh, trying to conform into this image and dominate the body is part of a similar tactic, which might have these Christian roots of dominating nature because we are part of nature. And that when we're trying to dominate and control something that cannot be controlled, we're really, you know, running parallel to some of the issues of environmental hubris and arrogance that have gotten us into really difficult situations with our ecosystems. Um, to let beings exist. Vandana. So there's been some work that is showing that exposure to nature and gardening helps bring about is conducive for body positivity. And I think that anyone who can work into a garden, as my professor Norman Wirsbaugh would say, see that food is not just a commodity, but a really a gift that we have to eat. That we see things that we might register as imperfections, but they only register as imperfections if you're trying to sell celery at the market. Otherwise, here's a thing that exists. What's popular now might not be popular in the future, but that's not doesn't have any bearing on the gift and the giftedness that comes from food that can come and nourish us. In The Pleasures of Eating, Wendell Berry talks about how food is an agricultural act, but that we can take pleasure from eating because it's truly a wonderful thing. Unnecessary mortification for the health standards of somebody else isn't going to be helpful. Um, Understanding the diversity of bodies is something that hopefully can come very naturally to Christian environmental justice advocates or other forms, Jewish, um, secular atheists, environmental justice advocates, because we understand the importance of diversity. This is a way that people are fat. There are fat people. I'm one of them, and many of you are too. That is a way that people are. When we listen and build that diversity, this is a thing that is important. We cannot be crowding out what is being told that we have to do for the reason of whatever, because we're this is unnecessary. There are people who are fat. Health is about wholeness. This is what Wendell Berry says. That health is connected to wholeness. It's being part of a community and not just endless life and all these things, but flourishing together. Um, there's fear of the bodies. There are fears and desires to want to regulate and control the body. But the body, like the earth, is its own thing. You cannot demand that soil grows something. You can try and you can do these sort of agricultural tactics which help it, but it creates deep wounds that you get stuck in these traps ultimately that we devote labor to growing food efficiently, but we're getting stuck in scary traps where there might not be enough pesticides or fertilizer to sustain this level of agricultural desired agricultural output. And caring and being in relationship with land and soil and seeing that we are not individuals. I mean, we kind of are. That's a huge part of understanding public health, but we're also interconnected. Um, so when we feel scared and we feel vulnerable and we want to control things, right? That or have other people control things, that gives us a sense of safety because it's hard to be a human being. Bodies, as my professor says, bodies are sites of suffering and pain, and the body, just like the world, it's not always cooperating with the human will. And this is why I'm interested in the concept of enkratia, which is used in Greek in the fruits of the spirit, enkratia, translated usually as self-control and sometimes as temperance. This is similar to the concept of domination because it's about a sense of self-mastery. That is not so self-control is not about dominating yourself or subduing your desires or who you are. It's about mastering and understanding who you are, listening to your body. Um, and also the idea that willpower in this platonic sense is going to go on and on forever is not, I guess I'm disagreeing with Paul here, that we need to think about it not as if though our will is always going to work out. Because enkratia in a really Aristotelian way might not be the enkratia that Paul is using. Because Paul knows that we are going to be falling into a crazier, but the greater and greater moving towards it. Bodies are good. This is a fundamental core tenet of Orthodox Christianity. Orthodox in the sense of Orthodox Christian, Catholic, and Protestant Christianity is that bodies are good. That the incarnation, as Athanasius says, the incarnation happened because bodies are important and worth being redeemed. I know that no one's really born fat and we sort of become it. This is a way that people are. This is part of God's wonderful diversity. And we can come to see that by looking um the moment we try to make bodies and places submit to our desire for where we want them to be, for how we want them to behave, we're going to discover that to do it effectively, we have to use violence. Because to come into the presence of creatures is to recognize they have their own lives, they have their own modes of fulfillment that don't necessarily align with ours. We have to learn in really, really important and practical ways about our own ignorance, limitedness, and our own patience. This is a quote from my professor. Um, Creation worships God just by being itself. There's a sense of mutuality that we don't stand outside of. Every beautiful thing can be subverted by human beings because we are imperfect. That includes the pleasures and the beauty of eating. But we know that fat bodies are not sinful or wrong or an aberration. They are good. They are beautiful. They are neutral and they are temples. So let's be real about that. And let's be honest in our critiques about bodies. That is not what goes into our mouth that is what makes us bad. What comes out of it. Access and all these things are important, but we could also know that celebrating bodies and body diversity and immediate acceptance of who we are is a part of it, and that um, though many people are subjected to the same pressures from food systems, not all of them are fat, and so our justice work there has to be for everyone, not just for the fat people who unfortunately became fat or some sort of thing, as if so this is a horrific, horrific science fiction experiment gone wrong. All this obese people all of a sudden. No, we are living in systems of mutuality. Um, Um, yeah, guess. Yeah, bodies are sites of love and of pain, and it's okay to be what you are. A fat body isn't wrong. You all know you all might not you all know that because this is a fat studies conference. But it's okay, you might not believe it because of all this bullshit we've been dealing with. Oh, wait, let's say fat study scholars have rarely called out the fat hatred of the Bible, but fat study scholars important challenge because many of my colleagues in mentation engage. Oh, this is a really good one too.